Welcome back. Today, we're looking at a really powerful political monologue, one focused on the need to restrain the Supreme Court, or Bagatz, especially in light of the October 7th security failure.
Yeah, the passion here is undeniable. So is the expertise. I mean, it's an incredibly strong piece of advocacy. So our job today is really to find a few ways to sharpen that message, to make sure it has the biggest possible impact.
Okay. So let's start with the structure, with how the sheer, breadth of the accusation lands on the listener.
Right. Our first point is about something we call argument fatigue.
The persuasive power of the material, which is significant, gets a little bit diluted by the sheer volume of very specific, very high-stakes accusations that come one after another.
Exactly. You're trying to build this comprehensive case of institutional failure, but the density of it actually can work against you. The listener is jumping from, say, the firing of General Zini.
And then immediately to the budget for the Haredim.
And then a second later, you're into a metaphor from Parshat Vayichi. Each of those points is heavy, and when you stack them so quickly, they sort of lose their individual weight.
It's like the argument is that the rot is everywhere. Military, legal, fiscal, even spiritual. But by jumping between them so fast, you might actually lose sight of the main target, which is supposed to be judicial overreach.
That's it. You're describing a systemic problem, and systemic problems, well, they really need a thematic structure to land properly. Otherwise, it just feels like a long list of complaints.
So how do you manage this huge catalog of grievances without, losing that depth of expertise that the speaker clearly had?
The suggestion is to group all these specific points into, say, 2 or 3 really high-impact thematic pillars. It gives the listener some scaffolding to hang the ideas on.
It builds a clearer path up the mountain of evidence, so to speak.
Precisely. So you're not just facing a wall of facts, you're being guided through a coherent argument about a strategic threat.
Okay, so can you give us a concrete example? How would that thematic grouping actually look with this material?
Absolutely. So instead of just listing everything, you create these clear units. I think the most powerful one is Theme 1, Judicial Harm to Security.
Okay.
You focus exclusively on the tangible links between Bagatz and the security failures. I mean, that's the hook, right? Especially post-October 7th.
So that means you'd pull forward all the details about the court intervening in rules of engagement or stopping the demolition of terror houses?
Yes. And the discussions about terrorists' living conditions. That narrative is just devastating. It's life and death. It positions the court as this sort of de facto security body, but with none of the responsibility.
That has to come first, I agree. The security angle provides all the urgency.
And then, for the other side of the coin, the more long-term ideological fight.
Right.
That becomes Theme 2, ideological subversion and institutional contempt. This is where you bring in the claim that Bagatz has a deliberate goal to, turn Israel into a state of all its citizens.
And that's where you talk about things like repealing the nation's state law and the law of return.
Exactly. And to really anchor that theme, you use the single most powerful piece of evidence in the whole monologue.
The Judge Amit quote.
The Judge Amit quote, calling government ministers cheerleaders. I mean, that single phrase is just intellectual dynamite. It perfectly illustrates this idea of ideological contempt for the elected branches of government.
So, two clear themes. It transforms a series of attacks into a unified strategic indictment.
Yeah, it gives it a powerful frame.
Okay, moving to the second critique, this is about the solution, which I think are maybe the most creative part of the whole submission.
They really are. And that's why our second point is about maximizing the impact of these power game solutions.
The most creative and actionable part of the argument, these power politics methods, it gets introduced way too late. It feels like it's overshadowed by the more generic call to just vote right.
It's a huge structural miss. The speaker's unique value is that he knows how to fight back right now. He nails the goal. Win on his court. Right.
But then the concrete action, the things you can do tomorrow, they're saved for the very end. They feel secondary to the big long-term goal of getting 70 mandates.
So the suggestion is to separate the two strategies, right? The long-term electoral one from the immediate governance strategy. But I do have a question on that.
Go ahead.
If the goal is 70 mandates, isn't there a risk that if you lead with these aggressive moves, filing complaints against judges, using 14-day suspensions, doesn't that alienate the very voters you need to win over? Doesn't it confirm their worst fears?
That is an excellent point, and it's exactly why the framing of these tools is so critical. They aren't just power grabs. They are about leveraging existing executive authority to enforce accountability.
Okay, so it's about procedure, not politics.
Precisely. By showing you have these tools now, you shift the narrative from helpless complaining to competent governance. It shows you're not paralyzed.
That makes a lot of sense. So let's get into the specifics. How do you make those examples of executive action really stand out?
Well, you need to detail the strategic genius of the maneuver. Take the 14-day suspension. You have to explain that this isn't just a punishment. The key is that it shifts jurisdiction to the labor court.
It bypasses Bogats entirely.
It bypasses Bogats. That's the masterstroke. The moment you explain that, you're not just being aggressive, you're showing you're thinking 3 steps ahead. That detail needs to be front and center.
It demonstrates immediate capability. And what about holding the judges themselves accountable? That feels like the sharpest tool in the box.
It is, and that's the second example you have to elevate. You emphasize the minister's authority to file a disciplinary complaint against a sitting judge.
And you connect it directly to the facts already in the monologue, like the Commissioner for Complaints finding that Judge Amit had a conflict of interest.
Yes. You use that specific legal tool. It's not just a media attack. It's a procedural move that directly challenges the idea that judges are above scrutiny. It creates a necessary counterbalance.
These actions prove political know-how, not just anger. They should be the headline, not a footnote.
Exactly. It's a fundamental change that empowers the entire message.
Which brings us to our third critique, which is about tone. And this ties right back to your point about winning over those marginal voters for the 70 mandate goal.
Right. This is all about the messaging needed for that long-term electoral success.
The extreme personalization and the harsh rhetoric, it conveys passion, sure, but it risks alienating the very people needed to get to that 70 mandate number.
It's a classic dilemma. The intensity resonates with your base, but the language, calling a sitting judge a criminal, or questioning if opponents have mental feebleness.
Or citing those really controversial historical parallels.
That's the stuff that can make a moderate or undecided voter just switch off completely. It can sound like a personal vendetta, not a principled institutional reform.
And you absolutely don't want to lose the core outrage, because the facts here are genuinely outrageous.
You don't. The suggestion is to calibrate, keep the focus on the specific judicial actions, on the decisions, but frame the critique around the procedural damage and institutional capture, not personal moral failings.
So how do you do that? How do you keep the fire but focus the heat on the procedure, not the person?
You lean on the facts, which are already incredibly strong. They don't need hyperbole. So with Judge Amit, you don't need to call him a criminal. Just focus on the institutional shock of what he did.
The order easy.
The order easy. The fact that he issued a temporary order to block the state controller from investigating the October 7th failures. I mean, that is a devastating procedural point.
You don't need to add any personal attack to that. The action itself, allegedly contrary to basic law, makes a hugely compelling case about the court protecting itself during a national crisis.
That's an institutional critique that crosses party lines. It says the court is prioritizing its own turf over national security accountability. Anyone can understand that.
And you'd also reinforce the conflict of interest finding from the Commissioner for Complaints. Again, that's just a factual violation of standard practice.
Exactly. The detailed facts demonstrate a profound lack of integrity. That is so much more persuasive to a swing voter than a simple label.
Okay, and what about the historical parallels? Like citing the judge who supported that awful Professor Marshak analogy, the one about Nuremberg trials for soldiers.
That's high risk. It's the kind of thing that can get you labeled as an extremist. So instead of presenting it as a personal indictment of that judge's character,
you frame it as a question.
You frame it as a question about judicial impartiality. You ask, is there a risk that these kinds of ideological alignments undermine public trust in the court's ability to be neutral?
So you shift it from you are a bad person to this action damages the institution. That's strategically very smart for that 70 mandate goal. It makes them defend a flawed process, not you defending a harsh tone.
It sharpens the critique. It directs the outrage where it belongs, at the system's failure to regulate itself. And that's the core of the entire argument.
This is just incredibly strong, deeply knowledgeable material. So we've identified 3 major opportunities for refinement here.
To quickly recap the actionable suggestions, first, synthesize those complex accusations into 2 or 3 powerful themes, like security and ideology. It just prevents that argument fatigue.
Second, elevate the power game solution. Bring those specific non-legislative tools, the suspensions, the disciplinary complaints, right to the front to show there's immediate leverage the executive has today.
And third, calibrate the tone. You keep that powerful outrage, but you focus it on the systemic failures, the procedural flaws, not just on personal attacks. That's really the key to broadening the appeal to hit that critical 70 mandate goal.
The material is essential, and these changes, I think, will make sure it reaches its full strategic potential. We invite you to make those revisions and, please, submit your updated work back to us for another look. Until next time.